Hello, and welcome to the Path of Maximum Resistance. I'm Steve, and this is the story of my life. First of all, I need to apologize for any awkwardness. As you can tell, I don't exactly know how my camera should be set up. I don't exactly know what I'm doing. I've never actually seen myself on film before. Film. So this is totally new to me, just kind of winging it. As you can see, this isn't the most professional environment. Over here we have my cleaning um, chemicals, I guess you could say. I'm not sure what the word I was looking for. Over there, you can't tell, that's my dog, Rue. I'll probably bring her in after a while. But anyway, before I digress too much, let's talk about what's going on here. So the title of this vlog, I guess you could say, is Path of Maximum Resistance, which, again, is the story of my life. I don't want to sort of, I said digress already, but I don't want to go down a path of self-pity too much, but it seems like throughout my life, when presented options that are advantageous to me or perhaps more difficult, I always seem to choose the more difficult route. Not purposely, I'm not looking for a challenge, it just seems to be my disposition leads me that direction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I currently live in California, way out here on my own. My only family lives on the East Coast. They're whatever 3,000 miles away. So that's part of that whole idea of path of maximum resistance. I chose to move out here on my own, and for the most part, I've enjoyed it. But it's also offered some unique challenges, which I'll get to throughout the multiple episodes that we'll have on this vlog. That I should also point out, there is no plan. I'm just sort of winging it, but I'll come back to that as we progress here. So I grew up in North Dakota. I was actually born in Philadelphia. My parents moved out to North Dakota when I was in high school. Actually, before that, when I was in middle school, to take care of my grandparents. So I moved from Philadelphia, near Philadelphia, to North Dakota, from one of the fifth largest metropolitan area in America to a high school in a town of 500 people, which was the second biggest town in the county. From North Dakota, after I graduated high school, I'd gotten into a lot of trouble. Small town trouble, not like, serious business type stuff, just, a lot of underage drinking, stuff like that. And I ended up in the Army, active duty Army. This was in 2001. September 11th happened while I was in high school. I was already in reserves at the time. And after graduating high school, I actually graduated early because I'd gotten in trouble. My school board worked some things out and let me graduate in April, actually earlier than April of my senior year. Again, path of maximum resistance. I couldn't just go the normal way. In any case, so I graduated high school. I went to the active duty Army, went to the 3rd Infantry Division, and when I got there, I noticed that all of the equipment was desert colored. This was prior to the Iraq War taking place. And my brigade within my division was actually getting ready for what's called an intrinsic action in Kuwait, where we were going to go to Kuwait on a rotational basis and support the Kuwaitis as they kind of show force against Iraqi aggression, the deterrent. I guess you could say it was a 6-month tour. I left on September 20th, which I remember very well because September 19th is my mom's birthday. And 6 months after September 20th would be March 20th, 2003. So on the day that we were supposed to be returning back to Fort Stewart, Georgia, we rolled into Iraq. Now I'm going to talk a ton about Iraq and about my military experience throughout these videos, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much now. In any case, my first tour of Iraq, I was with a reconnaissance unit. My MOS, if you're familiar with military terms, my actual job is I was a forward observer, which means we called in artillery and airstrikes and all that. That being said, during my first tour of Iraq, I did none of that stuff. And though I was in the reconnaissance unit, we didn't really recon much of anything. Yeah. Anyway, so we went to Baghdad. We ended up on the outskirts of Fallujah. We ended up being there for an additional 6 months or so, which turned into a year-long tour overall. After that, I got back to Fort Stewart. I got in a ton of trouble. I was drinking underage. I was just being wild. there's going to be so many stories I'm going to tell you as we go through these videos. I mean, I just did insane things, just crazy. Um, Suddenly, I came down orders for South Korea, which is where I always wanted to go, which is interesting because typically, if you know how the military works, if you're on a 3-year contract, as I was, you don't typically change stations in the middle of it. But it seemed like someone was looking out for me, wanting to get me out of the States because I was really on the verge of doing something crazy. Um, Again, you'll learn all about this if you're interested, if you keep following. If you don't follow, then you'll never know. I shipped to South Korea, which I was really excited about. I was still underage as far as drinking goes, but in South Korea, it doesn't matter. You could drink underage, and at that time, that was my priority. That's all I cared about was drinking, right? So I get to South Korea, I'm having a good time. I get there, and almost immediately I find out that 2nd Brigade of the 2nd Infantry Division was deploying to Iraq. So within a 3-year contract, I managed to go to Iraq twice. During my second tour, I was one of the few people in 2nd Infantry Division, because of the way it turned out, that actually had previous combat experience. And this time, I was with an infantry unit instead of a reconnaissance unit, which itself is an interesting story. Because the only reason I was with an infantry unit is because while I was in South Korea, I got in a ton of trouble right before we were about ready to deploy. And as a punishment, instead of giving me what the military calls an Article 15 non-judicial punishment, they shipped me from the reconnaissance unit I was in to the light infantry right before deployment. So the way I looked at it was that my punishment was death. Like, I really thought that the light infantry had a much more difficult mission than the one that I was, previously assigned. And it was true. That was the case. So we ended up spending a year in al-Ramadi, Iraq, which was at the time one of the most violent places in the world. It was crazy. And within the most violent places in the world of Ramadi, we lived in probably the most austere base. It was what we called the combat outpost. And it was just like, we didn't have hot meals. We didn't have like sanitary sort of apparatus, I guess you could say. It was very makeshift, and it was right in the middle of the city. It was right on the edge of the city of Ramadi, and it was crazy. It was real urban combat. It was for a year, which, again, I have tons of stories, and as you follow along, and hopefully I post more, you'll learn all about them. So again, path of maximum resistance. Couldn't just graduate high school and go to college. Couldn't just go get a job. I had to join the military, and from there, I couldn't just take like a administrative job. I had to be a forward observer, and then from being a forward observer, I couldn't just do the regular thing. I had to get in trouble and then go to the light infantry. So it's sort of the story of my life, thus the title of this podcast. So I got out of the military, and I used my GI Bill to go to college. I went to the University of South Florida. I never intended to actually graduate. Sorry, I was looking over at my puppy. She's staring at me. She's probably pretty confused about what's going on right now. Which, again, I should say, none of this is professionally thought out. I'm literally talking to you on the top of my head. No professional lighting, as you can see. In the sound system, I actually have a microphone. See it? A Rode. But I don't know how to use it. And so you're stuck with my internal microphone. Anyway, so I was at the University of South Florida. I studied international studies and religious studies. When I left Iraq, I actually was really intrigued by Middle Eastern culture. Which is interesting. Even though my experience was pretty negative, there was something about that whole culture. There's something about the Middle East that still to this day fascinates me. So when I went to college, my intent was just to learn some Arabic, learn something about Islam, get a Middle Eastern certificate maybe, party, and then end up back in the military. All along, my goal is to become Special Forces qualified. This is the most paradigm shifting aspect of my life, is my struggle with becoming Special Forces qualified, my failure, and the ramifications of that in my life. It's just had a resounding, crazy impact. That's really more than people probably would just understand. But I'll get into that, and you'll understand the depths of the disappointment I have over not making it in the SF, though I wanted to, and I trained hard. There's a fly in here. Anyway, so I'm at the University of South Florida. Come to find out that when you're not taking very technically demanding or rigorous classes, school isn't super hard. So I actually did really well. I don't know how to drink. Sorry, I didn't do so well in my Arabic courses. Actually, I got all A's in college, literally all A's except for my first semester of Arabic. I got a C minus. Um, so I ended up switching from Arabic. I discovered I wasn't going to learn Arabic in college, and decided to take something much easier, Hebrew. Also, did not learn Hebrew in college, but I took 2 semesters, and I had a very forgiving professor. She was a super sweet woman who liked me, and I managed to get A's, and I graduated, long story short, with a 3.82 GPA, magna cum laude, went to my honors college, and that whole sort of experiment of going to college ended up working out. I graduated my degree. Great. The whole time I was drinking a lot, partying, super broke. I don't come from a family that has any money. I don't, I'm not trying to sort of solicit your pity. Again, but my parents are both disabled. They live off Social Security. I'm just saying everything that I do is sort of self-made, which kind of part and parcel brings us back to the title of this podcast or vlog, Path of Maximum Resistance, and which also brings me to why I'm doing this. But I'll get to that. I want to keep sort of summarizing my life here. So, in 2009, I graduated college that year in May. I was working at a law firm, not making any money, but just doing some like sort of pseudo paralegal, really secretarial type work. And one night I was messing around with my buddies. We were wrestling around in the house, literally wrestling. By the way, I was in a fraternity, Sigma Phi Epsilon, where that's where I made all my friends in college. Though I was pretty anti-fraternity person, but overall it was a good experience because that's where I accumulated my friends. Any case, one night wrestling around with my buddies in the house, I had my leg planted, and this story takes a sharp turn here pretty quickly. I had my leg planted, and my buddy landed against it in a way that it managed to shatter my entire leg. Crazy. I didn't have insurance at the time, and at first I didn't want to believe that my leg was actually broken. I'm really into fitness. I love to run. I run every single morning, so I didn't want to believe that I had a shattered leg, right, or any significant injury at all. So I didn't go to the hospital the first night. That night I drank. I drank a lot. A buddy of mine came over with a fifth of, after already drinking all night, obviously I drank enough that I shattered my leg. After everyone left, another buddy came over. He's like, I know how to take care of you. And he brought over a fifth of whiskey, and we drank that. So the next morning I woke up and my leg was like swollen, like bloop. It was huge. It was purple. I basically kind of walked on it and went to the VA. And there they x-rayed it, but they only x-rayed up to my ankle. And it was just by the general practitioner. It wasn't like an orthopedic surgeon. And they were like, oh, you have a sprained ankle, which is what I wanted to hear. So they put a brace on it, which was the most painful thing of my life. They're like shifting my leg around, putting this brace on. Yeah. And it stayed pretty bad. So on Monday, at that point, my lower extremity below my knee was literally purple. So I went back to the VA, and I actually got an orthopedic surgeon to look at my leg, and he x-rayed a little bit higher up than my ankle. And you come and see that my fibula, one of the bones in my lower leg was like this. This is how it's supposed to be. In the x-ray, you didn't need to be a doctor. You could literally see it like that. And in between where the bone was shattered like that, there was little splinters everywhere. It looked like little broken toothpicks. Like literally you saw that on the x-ray. And even in my ankle, where the general practitioner had x-rayed previously, you could see a crack in it. I don't know how she missed it. In any case, they're like, this is bad. They actually considered putting me through surgery for Compartment Syndrome, which to them, to the hospital, was like the greatest thing ever. They're like, oh, it's finally a case of Compartment Syndrome. We've been like, this is like a case study we've been waiting on forever, and like, yay for me. Basically what happens is that your leg or your lower extremity or any extremity, when you have Compartment Syndrome, this is how I understand it, at least I'm no expert, it swells up so much that the blood gets logged below the swelling and can't circulate back up, and it basically becomes like necro. Not sure what the word is I'm looking for there, but it dies more or less. And so they end up like draining. They actually slice the extremity open, drain out all the blood, and then sometimes they have to amputate. Not what ended up happening for me. They ended up determining I did not have compartment syndrome, but in any case, I did need surgery. I had what's called an ORIF, open reduction internal fixator surgery, where they placed a rod in my lower leg. Interesting story. The VA took care of all of it. I never ended up paying a dime. It's pretty interesting how that worked out. I'm not sure if I actually qualified for the care that I received, and I'm thankful for it. And to this day, when people talk trash about the VA, I'll be the first to defend it because my care was amazing and it cost me nothing. And without it, I'd be a statistic of like the American healthcare system, like so many other people, where I would have been 24 years old and bankrupt because of surgery. But the VA took care of it all. So anyways, that puts us in 2009. So here I am. I have like, I'm on crutches, like one broken leg, and I'm still partying, still doing crazy stuff. I remember one night, my friends and I, we lived in Tampa, University of South Florida. We went to a club called Whisky Park North. To those in Tampa who are familiar with it, that's where we were at. And I had like no money. I had lost my job because I couldn't make it to work because I couldn't drive. And plus, I was just depressed. So I just stopped going, and I used my leg as an excuse. It was really lame. Anyway, we're at Whisky Park North. I had literally like $15 left to my name and no one to turn to. And I spent it on happy hour. I remember that. Came home that night, just wasted, had a good time. And that next morning, I decided this is stupid. Like, path of maximum resistance. What am I doing? I literally had no money. I couldn't pay rent. I was supposed to be the responsible one, you know, like ex-military guy, a little bit older. Supposed to be the mature one amongst my friends, and here I was calling other people's parents, asking for money to help with rent. It was so humiliating and so just awful, just the worst feeling. So I stopped drinking in 2009 for a long time. And I decided that I was going to go back in the military and become Special Forces qualified like I always wanted to do. And I started training like a madman. Like, I can't even tell you. So like, I ended up joining the National Guard and going through their Special Forces training program. And trust me, you're going to hear so much about this as we go through these vlogs that I'm not going to go too far into it now. But I was like so well trained and so well prepared that the Special Forces National Guard group that I was in actually assigned me to their unit, which isn't their typical procedure. Normally you go to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and if you make it, you transfer from your regular National Guard unit into the Special Forces unit. In my case, I was actually assigned to the Special Forces unit. I knew which ODA I was going to. I knew everything. I actually had my MOS picked out. It was all kind of worked out for me. It was just a matter of going and getting done with the training. You're going to hear so much again. So I ended up going to Special Forces Assessment and Selection, and I was doing well. Like, I finished like top 5 in every single event, except for the obstacle course where there was a rope I couldn't make it up. But otherwise, I mean, I killed it. Land nav, I crushed it. The star course, I passed. It was awesome. I was very well prepared. It was amazing. And then there's more to it than simplifying it like this. But basically, I quit. One morning, I hadn't slept all night. It was about 6 in the morning, maybe earlier. It's a funny story, which I'll tell some other time. But I was sitting on my equipment after we had reorganized our tents. This is that Special Forces Assessment and Selection. And which I should also tell you is after years of training with the SF guys in the National Guard, where the physical demands were actually more rigorous and more challenging, I felt than actual selection. Anyway, so that one morning, like an out-of-body experience, I just got up, knocked on Cadre's door, and said I quit. And the only thing I remember is Cadre, this big, tall Special Forces guy who I admired so much. He looks at me and he just goes, and recall this is after weeks of like barely even sleeping. Being that it was really early in the morning, he looked at me and his own reaction was, I guess you just couldn't handle an early morning. Or something like that. It was something about the morning and not sleeping. It was just very dour, just subtle, dry humor. And you just said, okay, take your stuff, go over there. And that was the end of my special forces experience. So literally, I had dedicated like years not drinking, eating perfectly, training like twice a day at least, um, just craziness, and then all to ultimately just quit. So yeah, basically my whole entire life changed after quitting that selection. I To this day it haunts me. It really does, and that's been 6, 7 years ago now, probably. In any case, so as this is going on, I'd actually moved to Washington D.C. because after breaking my leg, I had no money. So, oh yeah, I went to selection after shattering my leg. So I had recovered. I did a lot of work to make it back, to strengthen my leg, to be able to handle the rigors of the Special Forces selection curriculum. In the meanwhile, I couldn't find work. I graduated in 2009 into that really awful economy, into the Great Recession. And I thought, man, I'll find a job immediately. I'd written a thesis in college. I graduated magna cum laude from my honors college. I had taken Arabic. I had taken what I thought were pretty demanding courses. I was at 2 majors. Couldn't find work anywhere in Tampa. Just nowhere. I was applying 8 hours a day and couldn't get anything. Like I said, I was flat broke. And I was living on a buddy's couch in Tampa when the Army wrote me out of the blue and said, hey, we owe you $3,000. Because I had been stop lossed when I was on active duty, which means I was kept longer than my contract said I was supposed to be serving active duty, because when my contract expired, I was actually in Iraq. So for every month that I was extended, I got a little bit of pay. This is like 5 years later. So when I'm down to my last dollar, literally my last dollar, suddenly the Army out of nowhere sends me $3,000. So I take that money, I rent a car, and I move to Washington, D.C., sight unseen. I moved to a place I've never been to. I'd been to Washington, D.C., but like I moved to an apartment I'd never seen. It was actually like a slumlord, basically. There was this defense contractor in Falls Church, if you're familiar with the area, who has a house. And basically what he's done is he lives in the attic. It's really weird. He lives in the attic, and then he rents out like every single square inch of his house. He's probably making a ton of money, but I'm sure it's 100% illegal. And I basically lived on the back patio. I mean, it was pretty bad. There was like mice. His refrigerator was kept on a timer, so like you couldn't keep milk in it because it would spoil. It was pretty bad experience. I mean, it's not true. I shouldn't say it was a bad experience because I didn't really mind it. I'm pretty go with the flow, do whatever. So I dealt with it. But yeah, I moved up there without a job, just thinking, hey, the economy's bad, but with my background, the military, DC seems like, and plus I'm very politically active, I figured DC would be a place where I'd have some opportunities. Lo and behold, I was hired as basically a secretary in the Federal Aviation Administration by an awesome progressive manager who, to this day, is like, I'm more thankful to her than I am to almost anyone, except maybe my parents. And she gave me great opportunities. So quickly after being hired as basically a secretary at like the lowest pay band that the FAA even offers, I'd moved up and I was actually writing policy. I was briefing like executives. I was doing all kinds of cool stuff, all the while suffering from really awful alcoholism. That disappointment about not making an SF was haunting me every single day. I'm talking, I was drinking so much, it was insane. Like, if I went on trips, I'd have alcohol ready for me when I got back. I would know how much alcohol I needed. I would drink every single night. It started manifesting itself to where I couldn't socially perform. Like, I was getting promoted at work, yet my daily life was a struggle, like, really bad. It's so hard for me to even explain to you if you haven't been through it. But, so my boss, who I just told you how much I admired and how comfortable I am with her, we're really good friends. When we were in the work environment, if she was standing above me and I was sitting down and we were talking, I would start to sweat really, really bad. I would start to shake. I couldn't talk in any sort of social setting with more than like 2 people. If it was a group of 3 people, even if it was 3 of my closest friends, I would just clam up. I couldn't talk. I couldn't get my words out. I couldn't verbalize myself. It was just like social anxiety times 1 billion. I actually started making excuses to telework all the time. And then like we would have staff meetings. I would telework on those days. And I would literally take shots before I'd have to talk on the phone. because I was just so full of just this weird anxiety. And it got worse and worse. And the whole time, so I was trying to make the most of it. I was actually writing a craft beer blog at the time, reviewing beers. So at least I was trying to be productive. Like I was a functioning alcoholic by the very definition of it. This was writing craft beer blogs before craft beer was a thing. I like to be proud of that. So clearly I'd returned to drinking after selection. And that went on for a while. And then I'd come out to California a few times for work. And I knew this is where I wanted to be. Growing up, I was a huge Jim Morrison fan. I loved the Doors. And I just, like, I had this, with my drinking and everything, I always had this fantasy I was going to live the Jim Morrison lifestyle. Like, just be like, he used to say, like, you want to be like a shooting star. Just kind of burst and be real bright, and then fade away very quickly. Even more morbid, I used to even say, like, 27. That's as long as I'm going to make it, right? Like all of my sort of pop culture heroes all sort of died at 27. I thought I was going to live hard and do the same thing. Not even kidding. But anyway, that's a whole lot, and maybe more morbid than it needs to be to kind of just tell you about my fascination with California. But coming out here, it was more than just that. Just the culture, the philosophical feeling I get about California, just everything about it I love. So when I got an opportunity, there was an opening in an FAA field office out here. I applied. I got the position, and I used that to move out here, which has been great. And then I continued to do really well, and I was eventually promoted into management in the FAA. All the while, I'm still drinking like crazy. Basically, it culminated in the most California, the most LA thing ever. I was at the Whisky A Go Go, kind of living the Jim Morrison lifestyle. Before that, I'd started drinking at like 11 a.m. at a restaurant next door to the Whisky A Go Go. I can't remember the name of the place. It's an Irish bar. It's on Sunset, so those of you familiar with the area probably know where I'm talking about. I had a great time. I mean, I was wasted. I went to the Whisky A Go Go. Don't remember what happened there, but I lost my wallet. Next thing I know, I'm passed out. Like, literally passed out. I feel someone waking me up, kind of kicking me or whatever. And it's a cop. Or it's a couple cops. And trust me, I have many stories that are very similar to this. But this is the most recent. This is probably 4 years ago now. The cops are like, what are you doing? Here I am, passed out on Sunset Strip. Literally, like, on the sidewalk. And they're like, what are you doing? And I tell them, well, I'm going to my car. Like, what else would I be doing, right? So they're like, no, you're not going to your car. This is not what you're doing. So these police, being pretty gracious, actually, got me a cab, as far as I can tell, and sent me on my way back to where I live, which is Long Beach. Next morning, I wake up, I realize that my car is in Los Angeles, and I have to take a cab to go retrieve it, and that was $100. And I decided at that moment things need to change. So I went to a outpatient rehab. Didn't complete it, continued with it, but it made me quit drinking. And I did. I quit drinking. That was 4 years ago, and I haven't drank. I think I drank one drink since then. Not even like a relapse or anything. It was just a weird situation. I was with a friend I hadn't seen forever. They had drinks. I just drank it. I don't even have a desire to drink. It's crazy. But I substituted with smoking a lot of weed. I started smoking a ton of weed, which was fine, except for, I say which is fine, right? It got to the point where it started to take over my life. Like, that's all I wanted to do was just smoke weed, and I would start not doing other things so I could smoke weed. But yeah, I kind of had a handle on that. It wasn't as debilitating as the alcohol. But in any case, all that stuff I'll get into at some other point. But again, as you can tell, path of maximum resistance. I can't just, like, I have a good degree, I have a great job, still got to be doing crazy stuff. So basically, where we come to kind of getting pretty closer to the present day, I was working in my management position in the FAA, and I just got to the point where I was really depressed. Like, I didn't like what was going on. I'm single. So, like, I don't have a family to support, and I didn't understand why I was going to work every day and just going through the grind for nothing. It felt awful. So one day I decided I'm gonna try a different path, and I quit drinking, so I'd saved a bunch of money. And I decided that I was gonna do something that I'd always enjoyed, which was web development. I was gonna make it a career. So I went to a coding boot camp, which I graduated from, and come to find out that the curriculum wasn't nearly as rigorous as I'd hoped it would be. I didn't really realize this till after I graduated, and I started to interview for jobs, and I'd go to interviews, and they would literally talk about the camp I went to and be like, "We don't hire people from there." Um, and then I would talk to graduates from other boot camps, and the things that they learned relative to what I learned, like the real core computer science type fundamentals, design patterns, software architecture, things like that, we just didn't even touch. Time and space complexity of algorithms just wasn't part of my boot camp's curriculum. So I really struggled finding a job for like 8 months. It was really bad. And then finally, I got a job. This was only not very long ago, like a month ago. I got hired for a really senior software development position. And when I got there, the job itself was great. Like the person who hired me knew I wasn't that experienced, but gave me an opportunity anyway. But when I got there, the situation was overwhelming. I didn't know what I was doing. Because the position was sort of senior in nature, there wasn't really anyone there to help me. They kind of expected me to know what I was doing. Although my boss, God bless him, he knew that I needed help, and so like it was an awkward situation because he would still assign me things I didn't know even where to start with to do, but he would also tell me don't pressure yourself. But it got to the point I only worked there for a few weeks, but I couldn't hold my own weight. I was being assigned things that I just couldn't, like, I wouldn't even know. I would just stare at a computer screen for 8 hours and hope I wasn't exposed. Like, I couldn't just stand up and admit to everyone, I don't know what I'm doing, which is what I wanted to do. But it just, like, I was put into a job, expected to do the work, and I couldn't do it. Which sucks because, like, I'm actually, like, I feel like I'm a good software developer, right? It's just that they were asking me to do things that were beyond my level of understanding. Like I come from building independent websites that are like I can build like my own little server, like a SQL Server database, a front end, a JavaScript front end. But like they were using like TypeScript with interfaces that was talking to a buffer, which was sending stuff to a Redis server or a Redis database, which was talking to a cloud server in Azure and DocumentDB and Cosmos. It was crazy. And I just wasn't ready for that yet. I will be, but I wasn't yet. So I ended up leaving that job, bringing me to almost now. Um, so the past couple of weeks, I've been trying to figure out like, do I go and try to get another developer job? No, I want to build up my skills, get better, so I don't have that repeat of the same situation. And then I was thinking to myself, if I had, every option in the world, if there was nothing that mattered, what would I do? Like, if I were to wake up this morning and just could just do whatever, what would I do? And I realized that I would just do what I've been doing. Like I love to code, so I would sit around and code all day. Then I was like, I want to tell my story, and I like to write. So I was like, you know what? I want to get it on video. I want to start doing something different. I just want to express myself. I want to tell my stories. Um, and yeah, so I said, you know what? I'm just gonna do it. I'm just start kind of living life, not crazy, not like I used to live. I'm still gonna maintain an eye for the future, but just like if I want to make a vlog, I'm gonna make a vlog. If I want to tell my stories, I'm gonna tell my stories, and I'm just gonna live my life. And that kind of brings us up to now. So I kind of want to build out. So my plan for moving forward is to do two things. I want to start my own software development company, just building like websites for local businesses, and I think I'm capable of doing that. And maybe if the business expands, I'll be able to hire some people who are more technically proficient than me and really start doing some cool stuff. And then secondly, I'm going to start doing this. I want to start maybe blogging and vlogging all under this title of Path of Maximum Resistance, which will sort of tell my stories. And I hope you guys will sort of follow along and be part of it, because I have a ton more to tell. Like, it's crazy. So many military stories, stories about growing up in North Dakota, stories about California, um, alcoholism, all kinds of crazy stuff, college, all those cool things. And real quick before I go, come here, buddy. You'll probably get to see. Oh, what? You'll get to see. She's being very bashful. you'll get to see little Rue, who, by the way, is named after Claude Giroux, the greatest hockey player of all time. In any case, I hope you guys will follow along. You'll subscribe to my YouTube page, and we'll see where this goes. For now, thanks for watching, and this has been a Path of Maximum Resistance.